There's been a little theme that I've been using in these videos. Well, I like to name my ideas to make it easier to refer to and use them. Such as these ones when we first started. If you remember these, I had decided something versus nothing and sets and differences and sameness. I created little notes, little definitions. And also previously I discussed axioms, where we have something that we can consider true and things that we can consider false. Well, now I want to formally name several of these ideas. This way we can directly refer to an axiom for why and how we use it to build a new idea. This is important because it lets us revise an idea if it turns out to be bad at what it's trying to accomplish. We will have multiple steps and the axioms we used to go through each step, and we can kind of change that up to try a new approach. After a long and hard journey to find the perfect axiom, I had settled on the idea that I need about a dozen axioms to really explain my ideas. I consider this collection of ideas to be the fundamental toolbox. Basically, these ideas are strong enough axioms that I feel comfortable building my knowledge off of them. So now we're formalizing this. We can take these old definitions, these old ideas, and take them away, because now we are going to have these. The first tool is considering that reality is an arrangement. This means that everything that exists, or can exist, is just a particular arrangement of matter and energy. Thankfully, we can change this arrangement. Considering an arrangement is just a pattern of matter, we can find ways to change that pattern to some other desired pattern. So arrangement is both a noun and a verb. We're going to see a lot of these tools work together and will have similarities. So arrangement is a good base for some of the other tools. The next tool is effectiveness as a measure. This lets us consider that rearranging reality in a certain way may work to a different degree than some other method. If we're trying to accomplish something, for example, visibility against these two white cards. From watching some of my previous videos, I realized that yellow on the white background isn't very visible. However, red is. In my opinion, if I'm going for visibility, I know that red is more effective at visibility against a white background than yellow is. So comparing this effectiveness lets us measure different approaches against each other. There are a handful of tools in this toolbox that I've essentially already talked about. Considering that information is an observable difference and can be categorized into sets is one of these fundamental tools. Information, patterns, and rules is a closely related tool, along with pattern bridging, the idea that we can connect two dissimilar patterns. Remember, the idea of naming these is so that way we can refer to them when we're solving problems. So it's still a good idea to keep things as separate tools. This is so that way we can break down solving a large problem into solving small problems. Trial and error is one of my favorite fundamental tools. It has a related idea called tool use. Essentially, we can try any method to solve a problem, and we can be wrong a few times, but if we keep going, eventually we get closer and closer until we hit right on. So some of them will work. That's trial and error. Then these methods that work best are considered their own tool. They're a tool to solve the problem that we were going for. Basically, throwing stuff at the wall and seeing what sticks, and what sticks is a tool. Then these tools can be used and refined and mastered. It's pretty similar to creating axioms that we've already talked about. We create something and then we use it and refine it and make it better. Speaking of axioms, the tool working while wrong is what lets us rely on these axioms, but still make progress even if our ideas are wrong. See, we can continue in this way and slowly make ourselves more correct. As long as we aren't completely wrong in our assumptions and methods, we can become more correct in those assumptions and methods. But working while wrong and trial and error let us be completely dead wrong, as long as we just eventually try another approach. We can even utilize some of this incorrectness as a tool called metaphors that lets us create some sort of bridge between two patterns that don't really match and be a bit messy and wrong about it. Metaphors are useful in everyday life, so why can't they be a useful tool for us too? I do want to say I am going a little bit fast over these axioms, these tools that we're going to be using. I just want you to know that they exist. We're going to learn them a lot more as we use them. So the last couple fundamental tools are basically ways for us to explore a method to solve a problem. Action, restriction, and mode is considering that you have the ability to use a method, some set of actions, some method of arranging reality in a bunch of different ways, and you can see what is really effective at. Let's explain that one a little bit more. Say actions are different things you could do. I can point at something, and a Sharpie is pretty good at pointing at something. I can use it as a paperweight. Well, it's sort of okay as a paperweight. Holds the paper down. I can use it as writing, which is what it's really good at, because you can see it very clearly. Or I can use it to stand on top of itself, which, in that case, it's pretty terrible at. Think of this as trial and error means that you can try many different methods to solve a problem, while action, restriction, and mode is trying one method to solve a bunch of different problems. Restriction then is limiting this. If I were to write with my left hand, if I were to try to say hi and write upside down, well, it's not nearly as good as if I did my right hand, so using that restriction would take off most of this ability. But it would still make a fine paperweight. I could still point with it, and I could still try to balance it. And then mode is just completely trying to change what you're doing with it, change the problem you're trying to solve, change the way you would normally do this. It's forcing yourself to think outside the box. This is a way to explore methods and really see what they're about, see what you can accomplish with them. Heart, mind, body, and soul, or HMBS, is a cyclical tool. First, you just mess around with something, and then you really look into it and learn it. Then you use it a whole lot, and then you kind of just add it into the way you do things, and then repeat. For example, with a pen, when you're a little kid, you just kind of scribble, and then you learn to write. Then you do that a whole bunch as you do essays, and you get your penmanship down, and you learn a whole bunch of different words. It becomes without a thought. And then it just becomes a part of who you are. You can pick up a pen and write with your eyes closed, probably, looking at a screen while you write out what's on it. It becomes a part of you. And then you try new things. You try writing with different pens. You try drawing, and then you get really into art styles or calligraphy. Then you do a whole bunch of it, then it becomes a part of you, and you just go in a cycle. This is the idea that you can keep repeating things, but with more nuance over time. You need something to cycle back on. There's a lot of ideas of when you're learning. There's an idea of, I don't know if it's the exact name, but it's the cycle method, where you just kind of, you learn something, you go off, and then you come back, learn more stuff, and you just kind of cycle around, coming back, but also growing your circle of knowledge as you go. So I think it's important to have something cyclical in our fundamental toolbox. These two, action, restriction, and mode, and HMBS, I use a lot when I'm designing games, because that takes a lot of iteration. This was meant to be an overview of the tools I'll be using from now on. Remember, these are just axioms. I trust them to be correct enough to build upon. I'm going to keep these cards. Imagine we're playing a card game. The bad guy is the problems we're trying to solve, and these cards are my hand that I use to beat them. So I can play cards down to wipe out a problem. Remember, we're trying to break a big problem down into small parts, and I'll use combinations of these cards to slowly get through things. And then I will have the reward, which is usually either solving a problem or creating a new axiom, because I can create new ones. I can combine old ones, and I can refine them and make them better, more usable in more situations. So I really should consider using one axiom at each step to make sure I'm actually solving the problem. And also, talking about making these more utilizable, I think that these are going to be useful in many different fields. I'm going to personally be using them in computer science and chemistry and math, the things I'm interested in, but I do have confidence that these are useful all over the place, and we'll have to see for that. But we are ready now to do whatever we want.